what's unique about starting from scratch is that you could kind of build it as you see fit, and it gives you some flexibility to be able to see what works well and what doesn't.
Welcome to the Cybersecurity Cafe show, where cybersecurity meets business. Today's guest is Amil Abdada. Amil is the CIO and co-founder of Momentum Wealth Management, a boutique SEC-registered investment advisor, serving ultra-high net worth clients from family offices and trustees to entrepreneurs and private foundations. He spent nearly 2 decades of financial services, including 9 years at Charles Schwab, and earlier roles at Morgan Stanley and in algorithmic statistical arbitrage trading, managing well over $1 billion in combined assets. In 2024, he left the enterprise world to build his own firm from the ground up, which means owning the entire cybersecurity and compliance picture himself. That transition is exactly what we're getting into today. Amil, thank you for joining us.
Well, Rafi, thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
So,
Always a very interesting discussion.
yeah, I appreciate that. Yes, I'm really excited about this. So you launched Momentum in 2024 after nearly 9 years at Schwab and earlier stints at other larger firms. What was that catalyst? What caused you to want to go off on your own and hang your own shingle?
Yeah, the main catalyst was what we felt was a lack of, I would say, cohesiveness or essentially a hub for the client. And when I was at Morgan Stanley, it's a great firm, but it's a very rigid architecture in terms of what you're able to do to work with the client. And at Schwab, a very robust platform, but also limitations with how in depth you get with financial planning, estate planning, tax planning, the types of investment management and types of investments you utilize. Whereas as a registered investment advisory firm, you could build out the infrastructure and essentially the central hub with how you work with clients. And for us, it centers around having the tax, estate, planning, and investment all working hand in hand and essentially trying to provide a family office feel to the mass affluent because we still think there's a lot of complexity with many of the different individuals that we work with.
So definitely more holistic view than something that is just catered just with the investment piece by itself.
Correct. Exactly.
So what surprised you about building a firm from scratch?
Figuring out your location, your furniture, your tech stack, how you plan on incorporating different levels of technology with how you build the firm, the different custodians, the different software that's used for portfolio analytics, tax, estate, and really just how it all comes together. And you don't tend to think about these things when you're at a bigger firm, whether it's Morgan Stanley, Charles Schwab, or another big wirehouse, because it's all essentially there and prepared and ready for you. But what's unique about starting from scratch is that you could kind of build it as you see fit, and it gives you some flexibility to be able to see what works well and what doesn't, what meets the metrics of what we want to be able to utilize. And if there are other options, it provides us the ability to navigate that pretty quickly and not feel so hamstrung. So it was definitely a shock at first, but once we got 2, 3, 4 months in, and you really got the wheels rolling and understood how everything integrates, I still think that there's some areas for improvement in the industry to really bring all of the technology together.
Right.
But I think with the advancement of AI and how technology has advanced over the last just year alone, I think the industry is getting closer to that.
Yeah, I joined a group called Strateging serving the advisor community, and I realized how much of a cottage industry is around especially with breakaways specifically, where people who are starting their own wealth management firms outside of some sort of larger umbrella or a franchise system. When you went independent, how much of that security blanket did you realize you were relying on that you had to now figure out on your own?
I mean, quite a bit. I mean, we pretty quickly on realized that you have to work with some of the more reputable firms that have I would say a stronghold, or even just they acknowledge and are constantly trying to take advantage of the lapses and maybe downfalls that there are in the industry when it comes to protection of security and client data and what you're using. So who you use for a custodian, what type of technology platform you're using to integrate performance and data and integration. So working with some of those larger advisors and understanding really what it is that they're doing behind the scenes to protect that information is also interesting and kind of a not necessarily culture shock, but you're trying to understand what are they doing behind the scenes to protect the
Right.
data. And we're in a unique position because we were more of a boutique firm. We had the ability to kind of look through the lens of what we would want if we're the client, but then also what alternative options are there to also work in conjunction with the current security apparatus that many of these firms have. So
Mhm.
we have a relationship with Orion Advisor Technology. I mean, they're utilizing quite a bit of AWS and some levels of encryption, but making sure everything is SOC 2 compliant, making sure that everything is working in tandem and that there is no leakage is important. And I was surprised by how many different types of, I would say, avenues there are for security. And it's something that we constantly assess, and it's interestingly for us because we also have a separate venture arm. We were able to, unbeknownst to us, find a cybersecurity company, a data encryption company that solves, in our opinion, a lot of these problems,
Mm.
and it gives us that much more protection for clients that we're working with.
What was that first decision that you had to make, that you hadn't thought of before?
Oh man, there are many in terms of just security or just in
Yeah,
general.
and search security, like, what was that as a founder that you never had to think of as an employee? Like, what was that first security decision? Do you remember?
Yeah, the first security decision was how are we going to send and receive client statements, information?
Mm,
How do you exchange that safely? Because traditionally, when you're at a Morgan Stanley or even Schwab, client would come to the office. They may print it out. There may be a secure portal. They could log into schwab.com or Fidelity or any custodian they work with, and there was a level of exchange in terms of how that communication around sensitive information, whether it's a tax return or an estate plan or an account statement, how that is sent back and forth so that we could then put together proposals, walk through all the different options they have, while at the same time not wanting to receive anything through email, because that's usually the biggest lapse of what I've
yeah,
seen with clients in the past is that many just they don't realize how unsecure an email is.
yeah.
And so sending that information back and forth through email was definitely not the direction that we would want. So having had the opportunity to look through different systems that we have in place, setting up a designated client portal for essentially a vault, an encrypted vault to be able to exchange information safely was really the first decision that we had to make because we really couldn't build the practice without being able to communicate with them safely.
So, you're working with ultra high net worth individuals and some family offices and various trusts. That means that you're dealing with some really sensitive information. What does that mean for your threat profile, you think?
It means that for our profile that there's a level of stewardship and trust that we have to maintain a very high standard, and that standard is going above and beyond what the current levels of protection currently are. So for us, it really meant we need to be able to find ways to protect not only just the information but the data in in a different way where if something were to happen, and we see it all the time. I mean, there's always headlines around some big, registered investment advisory firms or banks that had information that was hacked or stolen, or something got leaked through SharePoint, and information became vulnerable. So for us, it means that that's going to probably be one of the most important parts for how we communicate with clients, and what we do to protect the information they have. And we've taken some really unique steps, and we have some partnerships now that, in our opinion, will allow for that in a very unique way that we haven't seen done in the industry just yet.
Yeah, I think you're always dealing with the level of friction versus security, right? You want to make the transaction as frictionless as possible. You know, when we're dealing with clients in the investment world, you know, their clients, they could be older 10 sometimes. They may not necessarily all they work on is an iPad. You know, there's lots
Mhm.
of different potentiality from kind of think about a attack vector point of view, if you've had some thought on that, what worries you the most as a business owner here?
What would worry me the most would be the level of sensitivity of the kind of unstructured data being compromised. Where everyone talks about the unstructured data that sits in a SharePoint, that sits internal within an organization that typically has the most sensitive information. Uh, I'd say
Email
for
or communication, things like that.
yeah, email communication, one view, what sits in a cloud, what sits internal if there's some sort of spoofing or an account gets hacked,
Mm.
and what happens then if data is compromised, and how do you protect the data? And so we've taken some additional steps to kind of enhance that. And so there's a couple things we're doing now that are very different, where we're utilizing technology that a company called Confidential has that is really unique. And what's unique about it are there four different levels of protection. One being they have a secure document exchange. And what's nice about it is that it's an auditable channel where you could send, receive, and trace sensitive documents. So most firms, you lose all visibility once a PDF leaves your outbox. It doesn't show you where it is, who opened it. The technology that is available to us now allows us not only to see who opened it, but has geo-tracking location. It has revocable access with post-quantum encryption. So we could actually selectively encrypt specific information in
Mm.
a document so that even if something's breached, because the encryption happens at the data layer, the data itself, it actually helps protect, insulate us because now we have that data protected in a way that is much more unique. And we're able then to then revoke access regardless if something is forwarded on or if something was taken from an email. It gives you some really unique capabilities, which we think is very interesting. And then we layer on top of that, there's a cloud protector software that allows you to, at a file level, go through an entire ecosystem and and allow basically firm-wide encryption around all types of cloud stacks, whether that's Google Workspace, SharePoint, CRM. And so it's really a direct answer to like a cloud app breach that may happen. So if it gets infiltrated, all that's actually seen is this ciphertext. They can't actually see any of the sensitive information because it could be selectively redacted.
It sounds like you're dipping into your quant algo background to help protect your clients too in that sense.
A little bit, yeah.
Yeah. We see like we're like our the biggest risk that we see is business email compromise, particularly as it relates to leading to wire fraud in wealth management firms. What sort of things are you doing to kind of help protect your clients from that?
Yeah, when it comes to, I mean, I would say having seen this at Morgan Stanley, even at Schwab, I would say that the fraudulent, emails, wire requests, that is probably the most, I would say, prevalent problem that you see in terms of just how frequently it happens. I mean, I think that for every 10 people that you run into, 8 of the 10 have probably experienced some level of an account being hacked or someone calling in, and so when it comes to that, your number one uh, level of protection is constant client communication. Everything has to be verbally spoken about. You have to speak to those clients. Uh, you can't just, we don't really do anything through communication of emails when it comes to that. I think that's where some of the initial problems tend to begin if you're doing that type of
100%.
and so avoiding that by all costs is, I would say, the utmost importance. And from there, you having good partners, whether it's working with the different custodians that we have and the different let's say, chains of how a workflow works in terms of when having protocol for when something is, if there's a distribution that needs to be taking place, what is the process for how that actually happens, and there's a workflow for every scenario. So detailing that is important, and having a specific kind of protocol in place coupled with extra layers of security, I think will help insulate for that. But I think that some of these firms, they've gotten so large, I think it could be challenging for one advisor or one team to oversee all the accounts. And I think that's sometimes where you could have a situation like that, where if you're a big, big firm with,
Because they don't have a personal relationship with that person and the client in the same way that you might.
yeah. And so you know a lot more about what it is they need, what their liquidity looks like, because you've gone through very advanced financial planning, estate planning. You understand when and where they need specific assets to hit certain accounts. So having that very, I would say, personal relationship and understanding, what that individual or family or entity needs, definitely helps insulate you, because it's one of the things that will help prevent something like that from happening. And so I think now, though, too, with AI, there's this component of some fear around, deep fakes. And so,
Yeah.
I'm sure you've heard of the stories where someone's having a full conversation on, I would say, Zoom, and they think they're talking to someone, and then it turns out that person wasn't them.
Yeah, it's,
So
the technology is getting cheaper and easier to implement for sure. Definitely on the voice side, but even more even so somewhat on the video side. So, yeah, absolutely.
mm,
It's, whenever you deal with these out of band communications, regardless of what it is, there needs to be more than one, whether it's email plus a call, whether it's call plus a portal, whether it's some sort of some are secondary authentication, an app on your phone. It needs to be something else besides just your standard communication. So you registered your advisory firm kind of around the same time where the new Reg SP regulations were about to come out, and now in June of this year, they're required for small firms. That a big chunk of that is incident response, issue disclosures, as well as third party risk. As a smaller firm where you're dealing with a lot more vendors potentially from the size because you had to couple together all these different products, how do you manage your vendor environment and making sure that they're doing the right things to protect your clients?
yeah, that's a very good question. I believe it's June 3rd, correct? I think that that becomes, a big priority. And for us, one of the things that we do is, at least on a quarterly basis, for every vendor that we have, we're essentially always reassessing the relationship. It's almost akin to, if you're, an endowment or a foundation, they may do it annual, they may do it semi-annual, or maybe every 2 years they kind of reassess. What have you done for me lately?
Yeah.
And so it's kind of that same philosophy, but with these firms, because I'd say one of the benefits of AI is how quickly things are becoming enhanced, but that could also, ironically, be a negative, because now everyone's rushing to kind of create something, and the the protection aspect of it, may not fully be there in terms of what type of cybersecurity protocols do they have in place to protect the data or the organization from being compromised. So for us, quarterly, we're speaking to every vendor that we work with, but I would say the most important thing that we're implementing is this kind of firm-wide protect the data at the data layer itself, so that even if these vendors get hacked or compromised, if the data sits in a Salesforce, for instance, and that Salesforce has the ability to then have all the personal private information
Mhm.
hidden, and then we could then select who gets access to what in terms of seeing specific information, then it insulates you at a very different level, because if you have sensitive information that's just protected, and most cybersecurity, what you tend to see is that they're always everyone is always selling like locks on the door,
Yeah.
and we want to make the data worthless through whoever walks through it. So that's what this technology kind of allows to do, so that if something does happen, you still want those controls outside the box, but you also then say, if something then gets through and leaks, whether it's due to a failure at the vendor level or something more serious, then at least at the data level, what then will be seen isn't visible to those individuals that may try to compromise an account.
Yeah, the
And so
Mission
we think that we're
Impossible.
real. Yeah.
Yeah, the Mission Impossible self-destructing letter kind of thing, right? So you
Well, what
can
it
pull
does
the
is
plug
it's
if something is leaks out.
yeah, I mean, so and that's the selective encryption part of it. It's pretty much one of the foundations of this company, what they have the patents on. I mean,
Mhm.
it was a DARPA-funded company spun out of Stanford Research Institute. And so for us, we look at it as a social security number, an account number, a balance at like the word cell level inside. It would be otherwise, unreadable to anyone that may try to compromise that. So for us, it's an interesting approach to be able then to come in, and because it's platform as a service, it's also nice because then it's also blind data. It's not some other
Mm.
organization
Mhm.
seeing it. So we think that I think the future of protect, at least for registered investment advisory for firms, big investment management firms, I genuinely think that there's going to be this may be the future of how you protect data because it's taking it a step further. It's actually working with the other type of cybersecurity software out there and saying we're not your competitor. We're actually complement what you do because we still want these levels of protection,
Right.
but then as a fail safe. So for us, that's I would say the number one thing that I think is most important from what we've seen so far.
Yeah, Sunil Yi, who is the chief scientist, was the chief scientist of Bank of America, now has his own research firm, put together a cyber resiliency network, cyber resiliency framework based somewhat on NIST, but he basically has, from a simplified term, four pillars: things that protect your devices, things that protect your networks, things that protect your identities, so your logins, your emails, and then the last piece, things that protect your data. And for the most part, we've done as an industry fairly good job with the first three. And it's that last piece that becomes more difficult, especially at the SMB level, especially for small firms. So kudos for you for looking at the ultimately that's the crown jewels. That's the real meat that you're protecting at the end of the day. Why not actually start and protect that information? Clearly, you talked about you built an algorithmic background. You had those strategies earlier in your career. Clearly, you have a technical kind of thought about this. You brought up AI a few times. How are you thinking about AI, both from a threat and also an opportunity in wealth management?
Yeah. So from the aspect of a threat, I think it's that I think what makes it more of a threat is there's still a lot of unknowns. So we know, but there's also the things that we don't know. So in terms of how someone may use AI to infiltrate something or to cause harm. So there for us, we're trying to constantly educate ourselves on what advancements are happening, what to be aware of, and what are companies saying and doing. Some of the bigger enterprise businesses, whether they're the defense companies, I know a lot now is around the talk of OpenAI and Claude and what's happening to the SaaS model and what risks are there and are they just going to is everything going to be just dominated by Fable or Mythos or Chat GPT 5.6 and is there going are people going to use it for bad? And my question always is, well, how always trying to anticipate, well, how will they be using it? And trying to then at the end of the day, kind of all funnels back to if they're going to use it, they're going to use it to try to get information. So
Mhm.
one of the only things that you can do is really try to protect the information itself. And so if you have at least that component of protection, meanwhile sourcing what other opportunities are out there for a smaller firm to protect themselves. Ironically, sometimes a smaller firm, although maybe more hamstrung in terms of capital that they could spend on this technology, but because the infrastructure is a little bit, I would say, cleaner in the sense of you don't have tens of thousands of employees to have to oversee. Whereas
Right.
if you're in a big organization, it becomes a big concern with all it takes is one or two maybe advisors email getting hacked. And then all of a sudden, if their SharePoint gets hacked, then someone could go in and see there's I was surprised by the amount of unstructured data that is out there. And I think there's still a lot of firms that are very apprehensive to utilize AI completely because part of why someone would want to use AI is you want to use the sensitive information to help make things more efficient, but then you
Sure.
can't do it because then it's out there in the ether, it's out there in
Right.
the public, it's not protected. So I think one of the benefits of AI would be that I think it can help make the industry more efficient around some of the mundane tasks like follow up, email, market research, market analysis, portfolio management, finding opportunities maybe within a specific client scenario and utilizing AI to kind of make sure you're piercing through every estate opportunity, every tax planning
Mm.
strategy, every type of investment option, or I would say tax efficiency, things like that, that I think it will help with. But I think at the end of the day, and this is just more of a personal opinion, I think most individuals, at least the ones that we've worked with, they want to work with the human element, and that aspect of it is I think very hard to replace. I think you'll definitely replace a portion of the industry in terms of how people interact with AI. And you may have you see a lot of AI bots and you see a lot of the things that people use AI for. And I think it's getting better and better by the day. But surprisingly, you see quite a few issues in terms of errors and things like that. So I think I think in the short run, meaning the next year or two, I think it's definitely going to help make things much more efficient. I think the ones that embrace it, they'll be able to, I think, manage their businesses more effectively, maybe more efficiently. But I still think that the solving the problem around protecting data is probably still going to be the number one thing that most people focus on, just because that that at its core is what allows you to then have the relationships, then to have the trust to then grow your business and kind of expand on it further.
Yeah, absolutely. We were at a wealth management conference a few weeks ago, and there was a lot of talk about artificial intelligence, primarily around as a competitor, people who are using AI to compete with wealth management firms like robo advisors, etc. There's also the idea of companies that are using AI for portfolio creation, right? Structuring portfolios. And then ultimately, partly the decision making. Many of them said the same thing you did, where they concerned about taking the human element because that's really where the relationship is, where most of them are. But still being able to leverage as much of it for whether it's ingesting data rooms and understanding what's going on before, looking at a deal more, I would say on the, say, private equity, private credit side, hedge fund side, versus somebody that is looking at a lot of different numbers. You were talking about tax efficiencies. Those are things that AI is really good at because it has to crunch a lot of data, right? But then that's a lot of data that's potentially very sensitive. And how do
Mhm.
you obfuscate the person or that is involved in that data? So there's some interesting technologies that are doing that too, where you put in your data gets basically scrubbed before it's sent to the model and then rehydrated on the way back. So you get the response in a useful way. So interesting things. I think we're going to have a little bit of turmoil in the next year or so until we sort some of this stuff out for sure. So from one RIA founder starting out to another that's coming out, what was the one cybersecurity decision they need to get right day one?
Day one, day one, you have to hire, you have to hire, I would say a tech team. You have to have a team. You can't just do it all yourself. I think that, for us, we did bring on very specific third party that had a specialty in working around technology and integrating, setting up the systems, which seem so simple, but then when you actually have to do it for the first time and set up your emails, your access, how often you have scrubs and updates to make sure all the software you're using is up to date, making sure you're running a cybersecurity kind of software even on your SharePoint or on your desktop for any type of phishing and all the different types of scenarios of malware that you may see. So it's just hiring a team, whether it's small organization, big organization, taking some ownership and kind of researching which ones may be the best for what you're trying to accomplish, especially if they have backgrounds in working in financial space or whether it's a specific industry. But I would say my number one piece of advice is don't try to do it all because you tend to think that, okay, well, let me try to run all of this and I'll find a way to make it all work. But the reality is your bandwidth is can only be stretched so far. And
Right.
you think you're busy until you realize, okay, well, I'm not just managing a book, I'm growing a book, I'm managing our sales force, I'm managing our householding, our compliance team, marketing,
HR.
prospecting, existing clients, portfolio management, planning, all these different things that go on, and you wanna focus your time there. You don't wanna have to be the IT consultant or IT tech guy to go in and have to fix these things. So I would say, definitely there's a lot of good resources out there, but first thing to do is hire the proper technology support team that will help with how, all your systems gonna operate and communicate.
I swear I didn't plant that question. I couldn't agree more, of course, but that's our world. So when you made a decision to hire a firm, how did you go about doing that? It's not like you came from a place you came from a place that had that team already in place. So now you had to find somebody that would work with you. How did you make that decision? How did you find that firm that worked with you to build your team up from ground up?
Yeah, I mean, luckily not it's one of the benefits again of I would say of AI and how much the industry has evolved is that there's a lot of different resources just out there in terms of advisor services, whether it's specifically for custodians, security, planning, payroll. So being able to kind of go out and vet them, have conversations with 3, 4, 5 different types of partners, even if it is for one specific need. We have the avenue to do that, whereas 10, 15 years ago, it's probably slightly different than 20 years ago, much harder because there's just limited options, but then
Right.
also less technology, which probably meant not as many, incidences of hacking and, cybersecurity concerns as we see today because it's just become so far advanced. So for us, it was a matter of, I'm kind of fortunate that having come from a private equity background, portfolio management, having worked at Morgan and Schwab, I had a good sense of different resources that I could reach out to in terms of the different providers and vendors that are out there. And then really just having a conversation with them and kind of walking them through how you plan on setting up your systems and whether or not they're going to be kind of a good fit or a good resource for what you need. And then that coupled with finding other types of technology that could complement what your technology team is doing because they may be really good at making sure everything is running the way that it needs to be internally, but then having another layer of protection around cybersecurity and data protection that ironically was more just brought to my attention through a former colleague who has
Mm.
been in venture capital for 20 plus years. And he so happened to be working at a company that was working on something that I think is pretty groundbreaking.
So when you looking at how you're investing some percentage of your budget on these sorts of things that are not going to be revenue generating directly, they're pretty much infrastructure. They're part of what you have to do as to secure your business. What does good enough look like, and how do you determine whether you've either gotten there or you're going too far? You're becoming to the point of that maybe you're spending too much money in this place. How do you gauge what the right amount is for you? Is it is it just comfort level and just saying like, okay, now I can sleep at night, or is it something else?
Yeah, no, it's a good question. I mean, interestingly, I had a conversation about 3 weeks ago with some of the guys from Orion Advisor Technology, and they're a pretty big platform. And we're talking about their Vault and their new AI Denali and how it operates. And it's this kind of integrated AI that only is ingesting what is kind of built into the system internally. So it's not taking in outside sources. So they're less concerned around feeding in from information from the internet, if you will. So for us, having had a conversation with them, seeing what they're doing, how much is being spent, we're clearly not going to be in a position to spend tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands or millions like some of these big companies because they have such large infrastructure. For us, it's like a 10 to 15% of the budget, but the way that we also then assess how it's are we doing enough? I also talk to some of the some of the competitors. I have, in our network, we know advisors at different firms. Having been at Morgan Stanley, I kind of know what they were doing and seeing what some of the industry RIAs. I know quite a few RIAs in the state, and many of them, whether it was Dropbox or just utilizing just I would say more basic deal rooms, was kind of the initial sense of okay, we're not as large as these firms, but we have a lot of the same infrastructure in place, and if we add one more layer, we'll be that much more protected, but also reputationally, it's important. It's the cost of if in my opinion, it's a nominal cost if it's gonna mean that A, the client's protected, B, your reputation stays intact, and then C, it's gonna be something that I think will also appeal and be very different to what other clients,
Mm,
uh, at other firms are seeing. So it's a kind of a talking point we like.
interesting.
For
So
us,
you're using it as a leverage as well as or as a differentiator, a wedge in your
yeah,
sales
because
process, essentially.
yeah, I think that's important. I think if anything, that's been the one thing that we tend to hear more about from clients and partners, some of our centers of influences that are out there. A lot of the concern nowadays is about protection, and
Mm.
most people are a little bit worried about what AI may mean for the protection of their own assets and their own data, and how do they protect against some of these things. So I think that if you lead in with that, I mean, that's the number one thing that most advisors have to kind of overcome initially is trust. Do I trust this person? Do I like them? Are they someone I could sit down with and enjoy conversation and trust? If you don't have the trust, and if you don't have the protection to be able to allow them to trust you, then it's kind of like a self-fulfilling prophecy. If you don't do those things, I don't think it's gonna translate to what you want long term.
Right,
So for us, we'll
right.
kind of like lead into it, and I think a lot of those clients and partners that we work with appreciate it.
So those are trust flags that you think, help you along the way.
Yeah.
So what would you think what would you wish that my industry, the IT and cybersecurity industry, understood better about serving firms like you?
And maybe I'll give an example of something because I think in our industry, there's this kind of fine line of there's, you want to make sure that you're doing everything by the book, compliant. And so sometimes there's this concern of, okay, if I'm utilizing some resource or technology, how does it work? How do I incorporate this? Um, what's the process involved? So I think, you know, a perfect example is a lot of these times when you have a vault, like for instance, you want to have something set up for a client to be able to send information and exchange back and forth. Well, what was very annoying about most vaults is that you send something out, they have to create a username, then a
Mhm.
password, and there may be the two-factor authentication, but it's a whole process. And so sometimes that may be a barrier for some people, whereas when we look at what we could accomplish with this other software or through this company confidential, the SDX, this secure data exchange, it allows you to send something to someone and they don't have to then create that they'll basically be able to access the information because you're making them and authorizing them to have access to a specific portal that you are then in control of. So it allows you to be able to exchange information. They could click a link, immediately be able to access what they need, but then because you have the optionality of the selective encryption and the revoking access and the geo-tracking location, it allows you more flexibility of being able to try to get some of these things done, simplify the process for some while still making it, if anything, more protected than what they were using before. Because a lot of these clients are just using the same password, or they write it down, or it's like saved on the computer and then the computer gets hacked and then there's an issue. So I would say if there's a way to demonstrate or even just I think it could be a very complex subject, so just maybe simplification of and breaking it down by like example of how it could be applied to maybe a specific component of their business, and then like
Mm.
baby steps, because I think some understand it and get it right away. But I think the majority, it's just kind of like it may take understanding it through the optics of how does this apply to my business versus here's some protocol that this team wants me to go through. But it's if you're able to kind of show the value add of why you want it, I think that may be able to help
That makes a lot of sense.
the industry kind of get pushed across the finish line.
That makes a lot of sense. So, Emil, thank you for taking time out of your day to speak with me. I really appreciate it. Where can people find you and Momentum Wealth?
That'd be mtmwealth.com. I'm on LinkedIn as well. And yeah, that'd probably be the best locations to find us.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Emil is a CIO and co-founder of Momentum Wealth Management, the boutique SEC registered investment advisor. Thank you, Emil, for coming.
Thank you, Rafi. Appreciate your time.
Thank you.